Right, well, welcome to all of you out there in the lockdown webosphere. It's great to have you with us. We don't take it for granted here, especially on such a sunny spring evening, and we really appreciate your company. And welcome to the fifth of our Urban Design Group ideasSpace sessions, which is entitled Perfect Planning. More on that and our speakers in a second. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Leo Hammond. I'm chair of the Urban Design Group and Urban Design Associate Director at Smith Hampton. By way of a small introduction, we had the idea for this session in the context of the planning white paper being due in the next few months. As I'm sure you all know, the planning system in the UK has been subject to an almost constant state of flux, especially over the last 10 years. We've had all sorts of changes, but perhaps most controversially, we've had changes to permitted development rights, particularly with officers not needing a change of use to switch to residential, which has been particularly controversial and has been put into much starker contrast with the COVID lockdown. We've had reviews of planning. There was the Rainsford Review of Planning in 2018, led by former Housing and Planning Minister Nick Rainsford. Came up with, in my view, some excellent suggestions, including that local authorities could act as master developers, and it also called for new methods for transforming the public awareness of planning. It's going to be quite a challenge, isn't it? The Letwin Review of the same year, 2018, looked more at delivery, and it was titled A Review of Build-Out Rates. The review also had some very good suggestions, I think, including additional planning guidance on housing diversification. If you look at the blandness of some of our environments, that seems like a pretty good suggestion. But, I mean, it could be that these reviews have the answers, but maybe we in the UK should be looking overseas. Maybe it's a more concrete planning system, with maybe a little bit less of argy-bargy, perhaps. Maybe like the zoning system, say, of the US. Or should we be looking at the public sector taking more of a lead in delivery and land values, such as is done in the Netherlands? Or maybe, and here's a provocation, we should just stop tinkering around with the planning system, not fit for purpose. Let's just start again. As the first Planning Act came in 1947, some people might argue it's produced quite a lot of mediocrity. And most of the places that people love, or certainly in the United Kingdom, were built long before 1947 and the Act came along. Well, enough from me and my blathering on. The Urban Design Group has brought together four great speakers to discuss their ideas for what could be a perfect planning system. We're going to hear from David Rudlin from Embedding, Kaye Stout from Pollard Thomas Edwards, Colin Pullan from Smith Hampton, and Jennifer Ross from Tibbalds. Now, these wonderful speakers have been given a very light brief by myself, which is very open, and told them they could be serious, provocative, propositional, a little tongue-in-cheek, or all of those. It was completely up to them. So the format for this evening is each speaker is going to talk for about 5 to 8 minutes. We're going to hear their ideas for their perfect planning system. And then we're going to have a discussion for about 30 to 40 minutes or so, till about 6:30. And then we're going to carry on the informal discussion for as long as people want to join us out there in the webosphere. And in all likelihood, it's not going to go beyond 8 o'clock because we've got the clap for carers at 8 o'clock. It is a Thursday. So let's get started. Once we've heard from all four of our wonderful speakers, I'll let you know, those of you out there in the webosphere, the sort of format for discussion, because the most interesting part of this is not just hearing from the speakers, it's the discussion that comes after. So without further ado, David Rudlin, would you like to give your presentation, please?
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, and it's great to see so many friends in the on the list of people on the Zoom there. So hello, everyone. As some of you know, I'm interested in the interaction between the way the planning system work, the way planning systems work, and the way natural city growth works. And so you get something like Manhattan, which is both an incredibly planned city, but also an incredibly spontaneous city. So this is basically what my book is about. I'm winner of the prestigious Urban Design Group Award this year, I'm very pleased to say. And a lot of the stuff I've talked about in the book is about master planning, but actually the part 4 of the book is all about planning. It's about planning systems and how they work. And it concludes that in the UK, we are uniquely bad at this. if you look at across the world, the way that planning systems work, the UK system is uniquely bad for all sorts of reasons, which no doubt we'll talk about today. And looking at the book again, I realised that what I've essentially done in the part 4 of the book is say how bad it is, and give a history of how it used to be better, but not done a great deal about saying how the planning system could get better. So before Christmas, I was invited by Policy Exchange, who produced a document that some of you will have seen a couple of months ago, I guess. I eventually asked them to take my name off it because I just wasn't comfortable with where it had gone. But there were some fascinating discussions as part of that. And we were asked to write an essay about the future of planning. And so I did one which was based upon Morris's News from Nowhere. And this has just been, we just published this today because we thought it would be worth sort of giving it the light of day. So if you go onto the Urban website and you type in Urban Scrawl, you should be able to download this sort of graphic novel, if you wish, about the future of planning. So it starts, as I say, with a planner who falls asleep on the train. In William Morris's original, you'll remember he's walking home from a socialist league meeting, and he falls asleep and he wakes up 50 years, 100 years later. And in my story, because I actually was actually travelling back from a Planning Officers Society meeting in Nottingham at the time, so I imagined him falling asleep in the tunnel under the Pennines and waking up on the Manchester side, where the Trans-Pennine Express had transferred into HS3, which was by that time running, 30 years' time. And he arrives then in Manchester 30 years hence, and I can describe what the city is like once our planning system has been fixed. And so this is him with his guide on the River Irwell in Manchester in a boat. Because in Morris's original, they take a boat down the Thames, and that's how they understand the future society. And so I sort of imagine how Manchester might be at the time. The first thing, of course, is that Manchester will be twice the size it is now. It's now a city of about 4.8 million people, and it's well on its way to fulfilling Zipf's law of cities, which says that in every country of the world, the second city should be half the size of the main city, the capital. And then the third city should be a third of the size, and so on and so forth. We are, in the UK, our second city, and you can argue about which is the second city, of course, but it's like far, far less than half the size of London. We have this incredibly unbalanced country. So the first thing that's happened is that we've had a national plan. And so actually we had a proper national plan, which has not done what our planning system does at the moment, which is essentially plan for past trends. If somewhere's been growing, the planning system provides for them to grow more. If somewhere's not been growing, the planning system provides for them to stay as they are. This is a national plan which actually says, no, this is the shape of the country we want. This is the balance of development the country wants. And this is the balance of investments. And as part of that, of course, the infrastructure spend per head of population in the north is now the same as it is in London, as in 10 times higher than it is today. And so we've invested in HS3, we've invested in tram systems in all of these northern towns and cities, and so all the towns are now connected into the cities, and we have a great urban conglomeration. This map shows Liverpool through to Leeds and Sheffield, with Manchester in the middle, and this is now operating as an alternative pole to London. The northern powerhouse, as it's now called, has become what its name suggests, and of course we'll have another one up in Scotland. So the first thing is a proper national policy in terms of the way that we work at a national level. The next thing we suggest, and this is all being explained to this young planner by his guide as he goes around Manchester, is that the main level for planning in the country is no longer the district, but it's the county or the combined authority at city level. And the mayors at this level were engaged in doing major democratic exercises to develop plans, what used to be called structure plans, I guess, but actually this seems to me the sensible stage to plan. The drawing in the background is the work that Urbit have been doing for the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework, including our octopus of accessibility, which I'm not sure has made it into the final draft. But nevertheless, this idea of focusing developments in the conurbation in the 8 towns of Greater Manchester, and therefore being the 8 legs of the octopus. But this seems to be the appropriate level to plan. The idea of these large plans is that they are generated through a democratic exercise, but once they are approved, they have the force of law behind them. Once they've approved, then development which fits within the plan is no longer subject to consultation or debate, because the plans have a force of law behind them, which is actually what most planning systems in the world do. We're the only people who debate and argue about every level of the planning process at every time anyone tries to do anything. In other countries, they make a plan and the plan becomes the plan which they then stick to. So it seems to me that is the first thing. The second thing as part of this plan is that the allocations in the plan are, as I say, have the force of law and are fixed. And so we no longer need greenbelts, because you aren't allowed to build outside allocated land. You aren't allowed to buy up land on the edge of the city in the hope that in the future that you might be able to win a case, appeal, and get that land through the planning system. If it's not allocated, it's not allocated, and you can't bring it forward. And that, of course, has now changed in our 30-year future. The entire land economy of these conurbations, we're no longer selling land at 2,000 times its agricultural value with the benefits of planning permission. The land values have come down to the sort of levels you see elsewhere in Europe, and the quality of the housing is what becomes the investment. So you have to invest in quality housing, quality development if you're going to make a profit, rather than basically speculate in the value of land. We can then go down to the local level, and we postulate a planning system which isn't too far-fetched, because it is the planning system used in most other parts of the world, where we have a zonal code-based system. We have four zones. We have a city centre zone, we have a high-density urban zone, we have a district centre zone, and we have a suburban zone. And for each of those zones, there are a set of rules which relate to things like plot densities, plot ratios, building line heights, party wall conditions, and they change for each of these density zones. And again, they are fixed. And so I imagine the planner going to be invited back to the planner of the future's house, and them saying, well, no, we built the house ourselves. We bought a set of model house plans off the internet, would have been pre-approved. Planning department therefore were able to say that they fitted the code, and we got approval within a couple of days in terms of planning and building regulations, and the system just becomes a very different type of system. In France, apparently 60% of all planning is non-discretionary, and is agreed over the counter by the planners, rather than being the subject, as we do, of endless debate and argument. So the story goes on. They travel down the ship canal by boat. They come to the Trafford Centre. This is my image of the future of the Trafford Centre, because of course cars have pretty much disappeared, actually. In my future, driverless cars have been banned because they were just leading to further congestion. And the Trafford Centre therefore got rid of its car park. There was no point keeping all that car parking, and it still operates as a shopping centre. But what they've done is they've built a new settlement of about 5,000 homes on the former car parks of the Trafford Centre as a new neighbourhood. So I'm imagining how that might happen, and also how the master planning process to allow that to happen could take place. The idea of reinventing the master development process. So it seems to me that the future in 30 years' time is there to be achieved. If we go the way we're going, we're not going to achieve it. We're miles off at the moment, but it seems to me not an impossible thing to aim for. So that's my vision of a future planning system. Thank you.
David, that's wonderful. Thank you very, very much. I'm not sure I'm ever going to be able to forget the octopus of accessibility, which is absolutely fabulous. And interesting to hear that you are a proponent of a less argy-bargy system, as I would call it, a bit more of a concrete system. All sounds like sensible stuff and some wonderful images. Right, thank you very much. We'll come back to David in the discussion. So next we have Kaye Stout from Pollard Thomas Edwards. Kaye.
Hello. That was great. Thank you very much, David. I've actually just spent the last 4.5 weeks looking after a very frail and elderly father in Stockport, And I'm just wondering if Stockport is one of the tentacles of the octopus of accessibility.
It is definitely, yeah.
Marvelous. That's really great. So I am going to look at it from a different approach. I'm an architect, and I have been practicing for 25 years. And what I did was try to think about what have I been doing for 25 years? Because number one, it was only when Leo asked me to speak that I realised, oh my God, that's how long I've been qualified for. And I sort of thought about all the different types of work that I've been projects I've been working on. So that's commercial interior fit out projects, one-off premium houses, estate regeneration, private housing developments, office buildings, business parks, all over the country really. And I concluded that with the exception of the ever tedious question of, oh my God, where are we going to put all the car parking? So that'd be great in 30 years, we don't have to worry about that anymore. The other universal question, or should I say really frustration, has been, why is this planning process so incredibly painful? And I'm sure it's not just painful for me. Obviously, I'm aware it's painful for our clients, and I think it must be quite painful for the planning departments as well. And so it's been quite a refreshing exercise to think, you know, what would I change to make it work differently? And because I'm always telling my 11-year-old son, oh, for goodness sake, stop moaning and complaining about stuff. Try and think of be constructive and come up with, you know, positive solutions. I thought, gosh, I better apply that to myself. So I started thinking about all the things that did my head in, and then I also imagined that I was living in a kind of parallel. So rather than living in the future, I was just living in a kind of parallel universe. And as I've been watching lots of superhero films recently, I've decided that it's Gotham City. And so in the spirit of being constructive, I decided that there were three things I probably would quite like to change. The first one is time, the second is communication, and the third is certainty. So when I think about time, I think about the time I've spent over the last 25 years mining through the layers of red tape and regulations to find out what development policy applied to this particular borough that didn't apply to the previous district council I was working in, or the city, or the county, and why isn't it all just universal anyway? I then had to think about the time, waiting, sitting around, the team sitting around waiting for the magic date for a pre-application meeting, and then the time spent waiting for the confirmation feedback of what was said during that pre-application meeting. And then finally, having submitted the planning application, there was the time spent effectively what feels like putting in a new planning application with all the clarifications of the information that's required, the time spent waiting for the planning committee, and then you finally get to the planning committee, and if you're really lucky, you can whiz in and out in 20 minutes, as we did recently in our first virtual planning consent, or you could be sitting there into the wee hours of the morning debating and listening to discussion as to whether or not what you've designed over the previous hundreds of years is worth passing or not. And so in my perfect planning world, the number one thing that I would slash to nanoseconds is time. And the only time that you are allowed to spend is on constructive and objective discussions that move the design development of the project forward within the planning process. So that was my first thing. The second thing I started thinking about was I was trying to remember when I started working in the 90s, how I managed to get information about all the various different types of planning policy in all the different boroughs that I worked in, because we didn't have the internet, certainly didn't have the internet in my office. And then I realised actually I would be handed a project by whichever partner or director I was working for, and then I would find telephone numbers and I would ring the planning policy department and I would ask them, oh, hello, my name's Kaye and I'm working in your borough and I'm working on whatever it is, whether it's a B8 development or a business park or a housing scheme. Can you tell me what the parking policy is? Can you tell me what your open space policy is? And what's really interesting, thinking back, is that somebody always answered the phone. And if they didn't answer the phone, you would leave a message and then somebody would always ring you back. And I don't think I've spoken to a planner or a design officer or anyone in that sort of department for absolutely years. And so it's really interesting how things have changed. So now standards are hidden within this labyrinth of the local authority websites. and you're sort of left to interpret what they mean. And the worst, and obviously I'm not an idiot, I don't think, but the worst is probably trying to calculate the employment space on designated industrial land in a particular borough and compare that to the GLA. And so I think what's really important in my parallel universe, and in order to have kind of meaningful, constructive discussions with your case officer and your design officer, is that you have to be able to get hold of them, and you have to be able to develop a relationship. So in my version of Gotham City, my second change is that I can reach any member of the planning and consultation team by getting onto the bat phone whenever I need. So then my last change is around certainty. And so in my perfect planning department, the team that I'm speaking to in the local authority will say what they mean, and they will mean what they say. They will not backtrack, they will not get derailed by last minute outside piece of consultation. They will not get overruled by superiors and within their department or other members. There will be absolute certainty that everybody is moving forward with this advice, with this understanding of the policy, and it will be very black and white. And I think in that case, we can just keep the process moving forward. And then I just want to change one law, because I was talking to Royal Kaito, who's our new writer and critic, and he had written a piece in a blog recently entitled "Laws Not Buildings Shape Our Towns and Cities." And his argument is that sometimes you need changes in law that can act as a framework upon which architects and urban designers can respond. And so what it made me think about was that in this time that we're all working at home, it seems quite insane that that the nationally described space standards are not nationally mandatory. And I understand why they're not, and I understand it's all to do with, land values and viability and so on and so forth. But in my version of Gotham City, the city recognises that there is a housing shortage, and therefore there is a value to all homes wherever they are. So all planning applications will include, or minimum space will be designed to minimum space standards, and the space standards will require space for bikes, space for prams, space for food storage in the kitchen, which will allow you to have food for more than 4 days, and space for wet coats. And there will be a mandatory planning requirement that you have to demonstrate how that works in your drawings. And that's it.
Thank you very, very much, Kaye. I love the idea of a planning bat phone to be able to improve communications. We've got time, communication and certainty there, all very important things. And it's interesting to have that comparison that once you could pick up the phone to somebody. And I guess I'd never thought about that before. We all just jump online now, don't we? Wonderful. Thanks, Kaye. We're going to come back to some of those points of the discussion, I'm sure. We're now going on to the third of our 4 speakers, and we have Colin Pullan from Lambert Smith Hampton. So, Colin.
Okay. So this is, when Leo presented me with this topic, I sort of thought, what is perfect planning all about? What's our dream? And it's interesting what David was talking about, because this was my vision for Trafford Park back in the day. And, I thought this would be quite a fantastic place, and this is where planning should be leading to. But where are we really at? So if we can go to slide 2, please. This is Trafford Park, where it could have been. And this is what the reality tends to be. We sort of give it a go, and then dreams fail, and we sort of knock them down and start again. And that can't be right, because we haven't been taught that way. So if we can go to slide 3, please. See, for my sins, I did urban design, and we were taught to create these things called urban villages. Most of you might recognise Leon Creer's sketch for Poundbury. And we spent a lot of time doing courses to understand what makes places tick, and to be as wise as David is in his analysis of towns and cities and things. But unfortunately, we start here, and if we can go to slide 4, please. This is where we sort of end up. It's kind of like planning leaves us here. I'm not quite sure why that's happening. And if we go to slide 5, please. Help. Our politicians have been talking about the environment for quite a long time now, and we don't really have much of a clue. If we go on to slide 6, these are just some of the thoughts that are behind what we should be looking at. So some of these are on in informing how we do planning. Just skip to the next slide, please. So on the one hand, we've got pressure upon us as professionals to build. Go to the next slide, please. And on the other, we've got politicians telling us not to build. And most recently, we've got, thanks to COVID-19, people not wanting to build houses anywhere. But out of COVID-19, for all the horrors that it's brought upon us, there might be an answer to how we can make our perfect planning system. We could have the next slide, please. Most of us have got used to, over the last 9 weeks, this scenario where we have two people that are probably clever, but they're not very expert. But we have this very clever man on the other side of the group that everybody's listening to. And this remarkably clever man has had a profound effect on what we as a society in Britain are doing. We're just not going out anymore. We're staying put. And that's a remarkable control for what is essentially a very freeze. We should get a nice statistic here. The single effect of how we've managed COVID-19, and most of us are probably familiar with these statistics, has had the biggest drop in CO2. And we've been listening and hearing about CO2 for as long as I can recently remember, in the 2000s onwards. And it's taken something like this and the control that's been imposed upon us to achieve what we've all spoken about, but never quite worked out how to do it. If we go to the next slide, please. So this is my vision for future planning. Meet the experts. These are the people that have quietly been in the background for so long, but are now at the fore. We go to the next slide, please. And behind the experts, we have the scientists. Most of us rely upon scientists at the end of the day. The experts have certainly been relying on scientists. The scientists are the ones that fixed London's first chronic health problem. They recognise that there was a cholera outbreak. We had the biggest piece of infrastructure that followed with all the sewers. And out of various initiatives, we end up with huge major projects that make a real difference. Planning informed by scientists. If we go to the next slide, please. The final slide. So this is what I would put forward, an expert-led planning system. And the experts are us, your qualified urban designers. And we're informed by accountable scientists. So when the highways engineer, say he's a scientist, for example, comes and says something won't work, he has to be accountable. We want our scientists to be experienced with technical aspects of our environment. So that is the health, the well-being, air pollution, everything that comes with it. And like the medical profession, which is equally venerated at the moment, bad experts should be struck off. And I originally had a bit of a slide there that said what we should do with them, but I've left that open for discussion. So there we go, Leo. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colin. Very good. Glad to hear that bad urban designers should be struck off. Perhaps they could be struck off our membership somehow at the Urban Design Group. That's wonderful stuff. Great to see that experts would be involved in planning the built environment. Right. Finally, I've just got an email earlier from Jennifer saying her Zoom keeps on crashing out. I'm just reading her email now, but hopefully she is with us. Jennifer, are you there?
So in order to respond to the tantalizing prospect of a perfect planning system, and I have been a person that's been a planner for almost 30 years in this system, so I've seen a lot and I've been suffering as much as the rest of you. But in order to answer the question, I thought I'd like to take a step back and set a bit of context for what I would like to see in the future. So clearly the economic and human cost of the pandemic has been tragically high. And as the previous speaker just said, it has had a huge short-term climate impact, with the IEA predicting an 8% drop in CO2 emissions this year. If this was repeated every year for the next decade, we'd hit the magic 1.5% climate increase. Now, it's interesting to note that the CO2 emissions fell sharply during the 2008 global financial crisis as well, but they quickly resurged on a wave of carbon-intensive stimulus spending as government moved to restart the economies. Interestingly, at this time, and as I sit in Dorset, I'm reading lots and lots of economic books because I find that really interesting in terms of how you can see planning going. And what I can ascertain is that from all my reading around the subject is that the economic community is pushing for a post-CV stimulus spending to accelerate climate action instead. A particularly interesting study done by the Oxford Review of Economic Policy explored the economic pros and cons of government spending on different post-crisis recovery policies. It asked almost 250 leading economists to rate these policies according to the speed of implementation, long-term economic benefit, and climate impact, ranging from positive to negative. Based on the research, a number of key policy themes emerged as the ones likely to have the greatest impact on climate change and long-term multiplier effects. And those policies are aimed at energy generation and distribution, reduction in industrial emissions, building climate-smart infrastructure, broadband connectivity to enable people to work from home more effectively, nature-based solutions to investment, electrical vehicle conversion, home renovation and retrofits, education and retraining our workforce, green space and natural environments, and healthcare investment. The work also concluded that the delivery of these strategies must be embedded in law and must be coordinated across central and local government, government agency, industry, infrastructure delivery. Piecemeal implementation won't deliver change. And that's been partly the problem of our land use planning system. It's only been dealing with land use. And therefore, we're never, ever going to do it unless government gets behind us and it's embedded in law. So this is profoundly relevant for our system and profoundly relevant for the implications for our system and really exciting for me. You talked earlier, Leo, about Nick Rainsford and his review. Fantastic, embedding a real purpose for planning and embedding it in law. And, and that is for me is one of the 100% things we've got to do, and embedding that with using the UN development principles, if possible. We've got the Environment Act just about to provide the framework to embed the delivery of a zero carbon future. And I think that is a great place to start. Dare I say it, the delivery of a net zero carbon future becomes the golden or maybe the green thread that runs through our planning system. With the potential of embedding it in law, it allows us as planners and professionals to, and the world to deal more constructively and proactively with the planning process and the tools we need to deliver. Now, I could talk hours about the tools and all of those things, and it's a massive conversation. But there's 4 things I really think we need to deal with in plan making, and it's very much the conversation that David just had. We need to get back to strategic planning, and we need to have it nearly needs to be derived from a clear set of national sustainability goals. Such plans should have legal teeth. And as David said, if they do have legal teeth, we won't be talking about Greenbelt. We won't be talking about the sort of and arguing about the minutiae of lawyers unpicking our plans. They should be able to respond in a holistic and integrated vision of the future, not just deal with land use planning, but deal with much wider, the physical, the social, the environmental, the economic needs of a particular place, i.e. more than just land use and numbers. They need to be aligned with all of the agencies and the institutions, and they should cover sufficient timescales. They're too short. They should be reviewed regularly, and it should be a proper conversation about where development should go, how best to link infrastructure, and how to pay for it. And it should be supported by local plans, highly visual things, which was David's next layer, which effectively deliver on wider plans. They should be the delivery tools, and supported by UDCs if necessary to really kickstart areas. It should be embrace technology and all the information that underpin planning to make it work effectively. We're seeing people jump the gun already. All the Yorkshire authorities have got together and to do it, and the Oxfordish authorities are doing it too. Consultation, participation, my next thing. We have to give a voice to future generations. I cannot walk into one more planning committee and be surrounded by white middle-class men. I have got to see younger people be the decision makers. And we need to think about the voice for the future, not NIMBYism in my backyard, as some of those hideous slides in the last thing shows. It's got to be about future generation. And we've seen, we've seen over the way that we are communicating, we can do it in a much more proactive and positive way. Place shaping and design, absolutely important. And I know everyone sort of starts calling themselves placemakers and everything, but it's absolutely essential for all of you guys as to be able to articulate and unpick all the problems and the initiatives and show how we can deal with things in a holistic and positive way. And a lot of the work that I've been doing with my Velocity colleagues have been showing how you can take very complex problems and solve them through design. Finally, the tools. Put simply, we need a complete overhaul of and simplification of the legislation that underpins the operation of the planning system. If anyone has tried to navigate them through the primary and secondary legislation, I've been doing it for 30 years and I find it impossible to do it, and it's soul destroying. However, my one bugbear is the use classes order and PD rights. We've seen so much creativity and innovation in terms of how we are using buildings and space, and how the way that we work and the changes to the way we are going to need to use spaces. And all of that needs us to sit back and think about those tools and the working of the use classes order and refine rather than frustrate use, etc. So that's my sort of few points on the planning system, and that's it. And I hope you heard me all through that. Thanks.
That's wonderful. Yeah, heard all of that. Clear as a bell, Jennifer. That was absolutely fabulous. Wonderful to hear your observations. I didn't know about the dip in CO2, but it makes sense in 2008. And also to hear your other experiences and suggestions on strategic planning and consultation as well. So we've heard everybody from all of our speakers. So we're going to go back out into the Webosphere. First of all, we're going to thank all of our speakers. We're going to thank David, we're going to thank Kaye, we're going to thank Colin, and we're going to thank Jennifer.